30 years into democracy, and South Africa is facing a quiet crisis of faith. We love to celebrate our constitution as one of the most progressive in the world. But let's be honest, can you eat a piece of paper? At a recent parliamentary colloquium, top intellectuals exposed the massive chasm between rights on paper and lived reality. They argued that while the Constitution gave us political freedom, it shielded racial capitalism, privatizing economic power right into corporate boardrooms. Meanwhile, Parliament has failed to pass basic framework laws for fundamental rights. But here is the real kicker. We are using debates about the Constitution to hide from actual work. For 10 years, politicians obsessed over amending Section 25 for land reform, using it as a convenient scapegoat for their own administrative failures. This isn't just laziness. As former President Thabo Mbeki pointed out, it's a systematic failure of statecraft that has left our youth stranded. A constitution cannot implement itself. It's a compass, not a savior. If we want true transformation, we have to stop debating the text and start forcing the machinery of the state to deliver. What do you think?
How can you achieve development when people are not actively participating in government? A number of African states are today under pressure to revisit and rewrite the inherited constitutions with the objective of transforming the colonial state into a constitutional order that is responsive to the needs of the people. This wave of constitutional making is associated with democratization and deepening democracy. The process seeks to address fundamental institutional crises, as well as establishing democracy state structures. The South African Constitution has been very instrumental and is considered to be a model. In many of the processes that I've participated in, it's like a document that's shared by all the delegates to see an example of a model constitution. And I say this really in all sincerity and conviction. The South African Constitution is a departure from the colonial legacy and sets the bar for many other countries engaged in constitutional making. It seeks to enhance participation, accountability, manage diversity, and constructively and promote peace, justice, human rights, human dignity, inclusivity, and democratic governance. It's established offices like the Public Protector to promote accountability, transparency, and service delivery. Additionally, it encourages devolution to bring power and decision-making closer to the communities. Further, it established institutional arrangements to support democracy, such as the Human Rights Commission, Gender Commission. In terms of rights, the 1966 Constitution goes beyond the traditional concepts of focusing on organs of government, separation of powers, and the protection of political and civil rights to include social and economic rights. And today, anywhere in the world, when you're studying socio-economic rights, South African cases, Grootbock cases, treatment action cases, are all studied all over the place because it has provided leadership in this area, really. And in today's constitutions that are being debated or being made in Africa, you just have to look at the Kenyan Constitution, for example, in 2010, you'll find that a lot of it is actually, copy from the South African Constitution, if I may use that word. And it's also interesting that many of the personnel involved in the development of these constitutions are the same people. For example, it may surprise you that the final draftsman of the Kenyan Constitution in 2010 was actually the Canadian who was the final draftsman of the Constitution here in South Africa. So you have a lot of interaction going on, knowledge that has been developed here, spreading and playing a positive role in the development of new constitutions. And I think there is growing realization that the state has a vital role to play in the provision of basic services, such as the areas of health, education, and basic necessities like water and electricity. The Constitution recognizes that the provision of social and economic rights as foundational for the provision of social goods, the realization of social justice, and preservation of the environment. Crafting a constitution in any country is a major exercise. Since the revolution in France and the United States, constitutionalism has played an ever-increasing role in nation building and in the establishment of the rule of law. The development of the 1996 Constitution attests to the significance civil society and the general population attaches to a constitution-making process. It also demonstrates their commitment to democracy, national reconciliation, and political development. As far as the Constitution articulates the vision of a new society, defines the fundamental principles by which the country is to be organized, and redistributes power within the country, it can play a significant role in the consolidation of peace and promotion of development. The South African constitution-making process showed the world that to maximize the chances of developing a constitution that works and is acceptable to the people, the process of developing the constitution is as important as its content. Although constitution-making processes are always context-driven, lessons from Namibia, South Africa, and now, of course, Kenya suggest that such factors as effective public participation, transparency, inclusiveness in the process are crucial to the development of a constitution that is durable, legitimate, and is accepted by all. The process must be governed by clear legal framework which entrenches these values. And here I'm reminded by the answer that the late Justice Mohammed of South Africa made when he was asked that, how do you measure a successful constitution? And he said that when the people look into the constitution, they must say, oh yeah, it's talking to me. So they can see it's actually addressing their concerns. And that actually is a true measure, I think, of success. Now, there are, of course, many other concerns. The concern today in Africa is over executive power. It's a common theme in most constitutional conversations in Africa. The most striking feature of the presidency in African states is its extensive powers and consequent dominance of national political systems. A serious search of constitutional arrangements that deepen democracy must respond to the need to decentralize power by national level government to local communities. Devolution, in addition to bringing governance closer to the people, can, if appropriately structured, operate as a check on the concentration of power in the center. Devolution is also an attempt to address an equal distribution of wealth and development opportunities in over-centralized state structures, and an attempt to solve political conflicts by providing political accommodation for the different factions and groups in multi-ethnic countries. However, it must be observed that the enhancement of political participation and accountability structures requires truly independent government institutions to make distinct regional politics choices for the people. South Africa, in the apartheid era, lacked institutional arrangements that promoted inclusivity, inclusiveness, and legitimate accountability. Mindful of the past, the 1966 Constitution provides that the constitutional order is founded on values of human dignity, achievement of equality, non-racialism, non-sexism, and is also founded on the supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law. The Constitution itself establishes an open society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights, as well as proclaim that the country belongs to all who live in it, united in diversity. The accommodation of differences is achieved within a liberal democratic framework through the constitutional entrenchment of such notions as the rule of law, equality of citizens, equality before the law, the protection of civil and political rights, social and economic rights, and cultural and linguistic rights. They do this by conferring upon the courts and watchdog institutions the power to mediate competing claims of rights by individuals, and the state and the power to evaluate the constitutionality of government policies and practices. The courts and watchdog institutions examine legislative measures in the context of the civil, political, cultural, and linguistic rights guaranteed by the Constitution. A key component, in my view, of any democratic constitution is the promotion of the respect of the rule of law. The supremacy of the Constitution defines the commitment of South Africa to the principle of rule of law and supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law over all institutions to strengthen and consolidate constitutional democracy, the rule of law, and a culture of accountability. The South African Constitution provides for independent state institutions. These, as you all know, include the rights commissions, the gender commissions, as I mentioned earlier on. And these institutions operate as a further check on state conduct to its citizens. The South African Constitution provides for, as I pointed out earlier, devolution, and this is an important aspect also of really devolving power to people and also enabling other centers of power which might in fact operate as a check on the center. Regions can allow local communities to manage a substantial degree of their own affairs and thereby forestall a feeling of inclusiveness. It ensures a measure of autonomy for the various provinces in the country, thereby ensuring accommodation of local communities that is a desirable approach for unity and diversity. The trend in the African Constitution towards the evolution of power to sub-rich national structures and local communities reflects the political evolution towards more democratic, inclusive, and participatory forms of government. It is premised on the fundamental belief that human beings can govern themselves in peace and dignity in pursuit of their collective well-being once they are entrusted with control of their own destiny through medium of popular local democratic constitution. In economic terms, devolution permits governments to match the provinces of local public goods and services with the preference of participants. Now, South Africa contains, as we mentioned earlier on, a comprehensive Bill of Rights. The rights and liberties enshrined in the Bill of Rights may be limited only in terms of law of general application to the extent that they limitation is reasonable and justifiable in an open and democratic society. Taking into account all relevant factors, including the nature of the right, the importance of the purpose of limitation, relations between the limitation and its purpose, and the less restrictive means to achieve the purpose. The right to form and join trade unions is specifically mentioned in the South African Constitution. Every citizen is guaranteed the right to participate in governance directly or through freely chosen representative. In a departure from the independence constitutional models, the South African Constitution goes further than political rights, and it includes, as we saw, the social and economic rights. This is a trend that is being followed all over Africa, and not only, I would say, Africa, but including countries like Colombia. If you look at the constitutional court decisions in Colombia, you see how closely they admire the South African system. Such rights include, the right to the environment, access to land, housing, healthcare services, education, food, and water, and the right to social security benefits and children's right to the inclusion of social and economic rights is justifiable rights in an attempt to introduce substantive element to these rights, not merely a procedural one. The government is constitutionally obliged to ensure progressive realization of rights. South Africa is now, without doubt, the leading source of jurisprudence on social and economic rights. Now, beyond the development of constitutional standards, citizens in African countries are demanding that governments live up to constitutional norms contained in the new constitutions. The well-known late Kenyan academic rightly pointed out that Africans no longer want constitutions without constitutionalism. Unifying all the elements of the juridical quest of legitimacy are the demands for the existence of legal barriers to government arbitrariness, defined as the absence of legal authority for acts done and a demand for procedural safeguards, especially during trials for individuals alleged to be in conflict with the law. It seems that governance in all its actions is bound by rule of law, by rules fixed and announced beforehand, rules which make it possible to foresee with some degree of certainty how authority will use its coercive power in given circumstances, and thereby allow communities and individuals to plan their affairs on the basis of this knowledge. The mark of good governance consists above all in its effect in nurturing and promoting the best qualities in people, the habits of obedience to government as the constitutional authority, its laws and its interposition in the settlement of disputes, and the redress of grievances, tolerance of political, ethnic, and other differences, the habits of integrity, probity, fairness, self-restraint, and discipline in the conduct, social relations, and public affairs, the spirit of enterprise, hard work, self-reliance, and inventiveness in the pursuits and activities of life, and the quality of public spiritedness and patriotism in matters affecting the interests of the community. The best form of government is that which fosters such qualities in the people as the initiative and inventiveness, and which tends to further improvement in the overall intellectual and moral qualities in the populations. The success of government in part depends on the such qualities, especially in terms of maintaining and promoting economic development and the well-being of society. It's good qualities of the people that supply the motivation for force that works the machinery of government. And it's important here to realize that we have to work on these values because they are not matters you can legislate. You cannot legislate tolerance. You cannot legislate fairness. It is cultures that we must promote in our communities. The rule of law and democratic governance, therefore, entails primarily a government that lives up to its responsibilities by ensuring the effective delivery of public goods and services, the maintenance of law and order, and the administration of justice. In addition, it involves the creation of an efficient and dynamic market that secures economic growth and prosperity, as well as vibrant civil society, which facilitates interaction between the state and economic and social actors within the state. Governments are organized around institutions that engage in the delivery of goods and services and ensure government accountability to citizens. However, institutional effectiveness and accountability are in good governance and the rule of law, are central, to good governance and the rule of law. Without effective, accessible, and responsible institutions that are undergirded by sustained constitutional structures and behavioral norms that guide the actions of decision makers, political representation and all its attributes is not sustainable. Weak and unproductive and unaccountable public institutions have been responsible for the failure of governance and general economic decline in much of Africa today. Transparency is an inbuilt modus operandi in the conception of democracy. It relies on the free flow of information, processes, and access to institutions. For there to be effective transparency, institutions and information have to be accessible to those concerned with them, and enough information has to be provided to enable citizens to understand and monitor them. Watchdog institutions have a heavy responsibility in involving developing a culture of understanding of and receptiveness to human rights concerns that extend to people at work, at school, in families, and in public life, including government officials, parliamentarians, and members of the security forces. A key factor in ignorance of human rights is ignorance of human rights by both law enforcement officers and their victims. This suggests a great need for public awareness of human rights and the role of watchdog institutions. Watchdog institutions can fulfill these functions effectively in states that do not have some level of democratic governance. A watchdog institution will find it extremely difficult to function in a state without a democratic system of checks on the executive power, where real independence for the ruling power is not possible, and where human rights and the rule of law are not respected in practice. By contrast, as democratic governance in a state deepens and matures, any national human rights institution established within the state should experience more conducive environment for operational effectiveness. Maximizing the independence of the institution from governance is important for effectiveness. Independence requires that the heads of national institutions be appointed in manners that give them independence from influence or control by the arm of government that the institution is designed to investigate. The executive or administrative branch that could influence its activities. Independence of the institution is enhanced by giving the head of the institution security of tenure and the institutional freedom in matters such as the investigation, reporting process, the burden, and the hiring personnel. Accountability to the public can be enhanced through actions such as making sure, of course, annual reports are distributed widely to the public and ensuring that there is a regular flow of communication between the institution and the complainant during an investigation and the entire process. It is extremely important to appoint individuals to head watchdog institutions that have the expertise, integrity, credibility in the eyes of both the government and the population. The strength of character and the courage needed to operate effective watchdog institutions should not be underestimated. Political and government support must be given to the institutions, its work and its recommendations. A responsive and responsible government is crucial to the effectiveness of watchdog institutions. If the work and recommendations of the institutions are ignored or unreasonably criticized by government, the effectiveness of the institution will suffer. The accessibility factor requires that the agencies charged with the promotion and protection of human rights and good governance be accessible to the population they are designed to protect, addressing such issues as public knowledge and the institution of physical location and diversity composition of leadership of such institutions. To promote effectiveness, there is a need for institutions to be decentralized so that population can access them. A good example of this is the Human Rights Commission in Ghana, which has decentralized to regional levels. The institutions must be representative, especially with respect to gender. They must also evolve effective service delivery mechanisms for service delivery to the poor. While it is agreed that courts have a critical role to play in enforcing human rights and constitutionalism, the courts are often expensive and difficult to access. It is widely acknowledged that the performance of the judiciary is hampered by the shortage of both human and operational resources. In most jurisdictions, courts are congested and are perceived as slow in their disposal of cases that are brought before them. These difficulties tend to undermine the public confidence in the ability and suitability of the courts as forums for the protection of human rights and the advancement of the rule of law. In conclusion, I would like to say that in a democratic state, the Constitution establishes parameters of state power and the scope of citizens' rights and responsibilities. It is, I think as we all agree, the supreme law against which state conduct may be measured or declared unlawful. At the core of a democratic political environment, therefore, are the overriding constitutional rules that govern state conduct and power. Deepening democracy and constitutionalism will require continued promotion of structural changes to institutions that promote accountability, participation, and transformation of governance in Africa. Political participation should not be limited to elections, but be promoted throughout the governing process. There is a critical need to strengthen the human institutional capacity of the courts or the watchdog institutions and other government agencies to improve their operational effectiveness. It is imperative that there be a wide and popular dissemination of information about their activities, about human rights, and the mechanism available for the protection of rights and promotion of accountability in the governance of the rule of law. While these constitutional protections that every citizen enjoys equally, their civil and political rights under the law, such protection depends on the ability of citizens to assert the use of these rights. Empowering citizens to exercise their civil and political rights must therefore also be in the context of government's responsibility to tackle poverty and create sustainable livelihoods and promote civil education. In the end, to me, the success of the project to promote inclusivity, accountability, and participation in government is inexplicably linked to the eradication of poverty that undermines the capacity of institutions and citizens to promote good governance. The transformation of African governance practices into inclusive and democratic governance cannot be sustained unless the economic conditions in African countries improves. On the question of whether the South African Constitution has delivered on its promise, I think it's actually the incorrect question to ask. In my view, no constitution implements itself. There is no law anywhere in the world that is self-executing. It is the framework for governance. And what matters is the ability of the government and the various institutions set up under the conditions to develop policies to actualize the promises of the Constitution. It is up to us, the people, to insist that, in fact, the Constitution delivers what it promises. It cannot self-implement itself. The development, and this can actually be also illustrated by the fact that, some countries, we all assume that all countries in the world have constitutions, but actually there are quite a number of countries that don't have constitutions at all, and yet are obviously doing very well economically. And here, I, of course, will be referring to New Zealand, for example. It has no constitution. And also the UK, as you know, doesn't have a written constitution. But that, I think, shows that in the end, the economic policies, the eradication of poverty, the empowering of people is what actually drives good governance. Now, here, of course, I'm not advocating that a constitution is no use. No. For new states, it's imperative, of course, to have those arrangements. Now, continuing on the South African issue, on the question whether the South African Constitution has delivered, as I say, no constitution implements itself. It's a framework for governance, and that matters is the ability of the government and various institutions set up under the Constitution to develop policies to actualize the promises of the Constitution. The development challenges of South Africa are tied to deeper historical and structural realities that continue to shape South African society. South African challenges lies in restructuring in order to bring about transformation. Under the apartheid system of government, it was exclusion, dispossession, and control of every aspect of life. And this, of course, produced long-term inequality, division, and social fragmentation. The constitutional system changed, as we all agree, under the 1996 Constitution. The structural inequalities in South Africa under apartheid needed laws to create them. They do not need laws to continue because they are entrenched in the society. You now need laws to actually restructure those structures. The unequal structures that sustain the inequality still exist, and unless reformed, will continue to deliver inequality, because this is what they were created for, and it's the only thing they can deliver. This means that we need policies and programs that address structural legacies left by apartheid and left by colonialism. So with those remarks, I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on the constitutional developments in South Africa and also occasionally referring to what's happening elsewhere in Africa. Thank you very much.
Has the constitutional promise been fulfilled, or is it a dream deferred? Let me know in the comments below.